Hello everyone, I'm John Diamond and welcome to the June Entuity Tech Talk. Today's session will be presenting a few third-party data sharing strategy techniques. And with me is Larry Balon. We're part of the US-based engineering team for Entuity. A few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. The call is on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. However, do feel free to ask questions at any time via the chat panel. We'll be sure to have time at the end to take these questions that have been posted during the presentation. Today, we'll be using Entuity Network Analytics, commonly called ENA. It's also referred to as version 17.0 of Entuity, and our BMC customers know it as Entuity Network Analyzer for TrueSight. ENA is the upgrade to Entuity 16.5. For those who are still on 16.5 or possibly even earlier versions and are planning to upgrade this year, we invite you to contact your Entuity system engineer. We are more than happy to discuss any facet of the new product with you and help you devise an upgrade path that makes sense for your organization. Now, before we jump into see what Larry has to show you, he's got some demonstrations to show you all about data sharing. I want to go over the two approaches that we'll be presenting today. We'll be talking about the RESTful API. This is a modern, you might even call it 21st century approach to data integration. It's a sophisticated multifunction API, all fully documented on the ENA Help Center. Larry will show you a bit more of that when we get there. And it uses either HTTP or HTTPS, depending upon how you've got your servers configured to move the data. It will allow you, among other things, to extract data from the database. And one of the primary things is that you're going to have to explain to it what data it is that you want. This is done in the form of a data access template. And Larry's going to show you all about that. Very important point about what one of the things that the RESTful API brings to the table, and that is that if you are extracting time series data samples, let's say, for example, samples gathered every 5 minutes for port utilization, then you can request up to the very most recently gathered sample to be included. Now, the general philosophy of the way that the REST API works is that it allows you to pull data from ENA. So your external system is pulling the data on request from ENA. Now, there's another approach, and that is what we call data export. This relies upon creating and using a secondary or export database, and that can be hosted either on the same database server, the MariaDB database server that is on that instance of ENA. It can host multiple separate databases, and you can build a separate one for export purposes. Or maybe you could host that on a different ENA server and have the export database on a separate ENA server. You don't even need the export database to be hosted on an ENA server, provided you have a server that's running either MariaDB or MySQL, then that will act as a host for that export database. Now, as with the data access template in the RESTful API that described what data was going to be exported, the same thing applies to the data export facility, and we call that a data set. And Larry will show you how these data sets can be constructed to describe what data it is that you want to be exported. The data is exported under the control of a data export job. Now, these jobs can be executed manually through the user interface, or you can use a scheduler that's inbuilt. And that allows for one or more jobs to be implemented, and each job can export one or more data set to the external database. And finally, the general philosophy of using data export is that it pushes data from the ENA server out to the export database. So data export pushes, the RESTful API allows an external system to pull data, the opposite approach. Now that said, I'm going to pass control over to Larry, and he's going to take you through a demonstration of both techniques. Take it away, Larry.
Thank you, JD. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those of you who may be logging in from overseas. I'm going to share out my desktop, and right now I'm just sitting here at the UI. So as JD mentioned previously, there's basically we have two methods of extracting data from Entuity. One is via the REST API, and the other is via our data export utility. Each one of these tools has its own use, and if you are looking to extract time series or time-sensitive data, for example, we have a customer that is using it to provide port-level metrics in a dashboard that they've created, then that would be a use case for the REST API. Another customer that is using the retained data from the utilization at the port level to do and perform capacity planning. That is not time sensitive. They need quite a bit of data out of our system. They have close to 40,000 ports, and they're doing capacity planning on those ports. So that is more of a use case for the data export tool, and that's exactly the example I'm going to use during today's demo. The REST API we developed in 16.5, and we've continually added features to it. It can be used for extracting time series information, which is one of the use cases I'm going to show today. That is done using a data access template. But it also can be used for extracting things like inventory information, object attributes, incidents, events. It can also be used to push that information into the system. We have several customers that utilize the API to actually add devices to inventory and create views. So it's very flexible. If you want to know all about the functionality of the API, you can just go over to our Help Center, which we've recently done a major makeover on to try to make it easier to use. We have additional categories here, but I'll just quickly go. In the reference materials section, you'll see a hyperlink to the ENA RESTful API, and in a couple of mouse clicks, you can bring up a PDF version of this document. The current version is 4.2, and that is current as of patch 5, which is what the current patch level of 17.0 is. So let me close this out. I'm going to show a couple of examples. So one of the tools I use in my lab is an open source tool called ARC, or just the Advanced REST Client. This is a good way to test to make sure that you're able to extract the data you're looking to extract from Entuity. The first use case I'm going to show is basically pulling a list of open incidents out of the Entuity database. So we do support from the perspective of the format. We do support JSON and XML as media types. However, the data access template tool, when you extract data from the system, only supports XML. Just something to be aware of. So I'm going to just basically send this request. It's sent to my lab server, and basically it's asking for a list of all incidents in JSON format. It's basically pulled that data, and you can see here we have the information in JSON. So this is verified that the call is working to my Entuity server. I'm going to quickly go over to a short Python program that I wrote. This is just to show you an example of how to extract information out of the database. So here I'm importing some modules that are required for me to extract the JSON to encode the requests. But basically, the request here, you can see I'm going to my lab server. It's the same one I issued on the REST client. And it's authenticating using the password and username here. And it's basically going to format this into a dictionary that Python can use. And then all I'm doing is iterating over the incidents dictionary, and I'm extracting the timestamp. And if I go back to the REST client, you'll see the timestamp is in Unix format. So that's not the way I want that to display. Hang on 1 minute here. I'm going to convert the timestamp into UTC format. So I'm just going to run the program from the command line. I'm taking the output of this Python program and just piping it into a file. It's already done, and I can come and look at this incidents.txt file, and you can see I've got a nice, neat format, and I've pulled the data that I want. I've got the timestamp, the description, the details, and the source. There's other information I could add. I could also utilize the Python program to save this in a different format. I've just, for today's demonstration, just cobbled this together just to show you what can be done. So the second part of the demo, I'm going to go back to the system, and I'm also going to use the advanced REST client. And I'll talk a little bit about the data access template. So there's basically two parts to this part of our REST API. This is what you would use if you want to customize and extract data for your own use. And it's really relevant for extracting things like time series data. So there's two parts. There's the template management part. That's where you can retrieve a list of templates. You can retrieve a description of the template. And you can also use the post command to create new templates. We have one default template that's part of the standard software. It was developed specifically for true site operations management. However, you can create your own templates. They do utilize some of our Stormworks statement language. So if you have some specific requirements, just contact your local system engineer, and they'd be more than happy to help you on that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring back a list of the data access templates from my system. And this just basically says, this command here just says bring everything back. Hang on. Okay, what I expect back is a 200 OK message, and you can see here there's one template. This is the system default data access template for TSOM. If there were additional templates on here, they would be listed as well. If I want to see what that template actually does, I simply put a forward slash, and I put the name of the template here, and I'll authenticate and bring that information back. And you'll see here that there's quite a lot of information. So this template brings back object attributes at the device level. So it gets the management level, the type of device, manufacturer, model, serial number, and so forth. After that, it's going to provide some streams, and streams in Entuity speak is basically time series information. So the device CPU, memory utilization, latency, IP discards, and buffer overruns if they're routers, and the SNMP response time. After that, it's going to go through all of the ports on the device, and again, it's going to provide some attribute information, including whether the port's operationally up or down, and whether it's spare, and then it will provide information on the traffic rate as well. So I'll go back up to so if I want to pull data, actually pull the data from a specific template, that requires a different call. And you can see here that basically here it's prefaced with the word data access. That means I need to supply it with the template name, which in this case is going to be TSOM, and I have to provide it with a view name. This is the most basic call you can make to the system, and it will return all the information in that view. Now, I've restricted this view to 2 devices to reduce the amount of information that's going to be returned. However, there are additional modifiers to this command that are listed in the guide that allow you to bring back a defined time range for time series information. The call as it is now that you see here is just going to bring back the latest 5-minute sample out of the database for any time series information. If you need a range, you can add that. There's also you also can put a limit clause in to limit the amount of data that is pulled from the database when the data access template is run. So I'll do that. Add the correct password here. And again, we see it, what we expect back from the system is a 200 OK message. And if I scroll down here, you'll see that it returns the server name. You'll see a start and end time as 0. That basically indicates that I didn't put a range in here, and it's just going to return the last time sample. And again, it processed 152 elements, and the position that it ended up is the end, meaning there's no more data to be returned. Again, these are modifiers that you can add to the call to restrict how much information is returned. You can see here it's returned the host name, the manufacturer, model number, and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of these fields, but you can see here it is returning the time series information as well. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the data export tool. So I'm going to close this out. We won't need this any longer. So one of the things that JD had spoken about, and I'll just reiterate, is when you configure data export, it will normally be set up on the same Entuity server. However, if you're in a multi-server environment where you've got multiple polling servers, you can create the database on the consolidation server, or you can spin up a separate server that houses its own database and have the export utility point to that external database. The data export database needs to be created using command line tools for MySQL. That's beyond the scope of today's discussion. However, I will quickly go to the help screen and go to and search on data export. And basically, if you want to create your own data export, then this is where you want to start. The link that says, how do I create and manage a target database? We'll provide this information as part of our follow-up today, but this steps you through creating the target database. When you create the database, there's only local access. So if you have an external application that needs to access the database, you're going to have to grant access to either a specific IP address or a range of IP addresses. And again, this is done through the command line tools, and this section of our help center will step you through that. I've already gone through that. I've created a database called reports data, so the rest of the configuration can be done through the web UI. It is a 2-step process. So under the administration tab, the first thing I want to do is create one or more data sets. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a job to that to do an export. And the job allows you to basically run that through a scheduler. The example I'm using today is basically exporting port time series information into an external database. Let me tweak this. So what you'll see here in my lab, you'll see that I do have some existing data sets. They are preceded by a tilde character. All this means is that these data sets were configured using configuration files on the server. The tilde indicates that they can't be modified. So anything you create through the web UI, you can change or delete. So I'm going to create two data sets. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the object attributes, and I'm going to create a data set for port attributes. There's a checkbox here to include hidden data. So I'm going to basically include the device name as part of the export data set. It is available in two different places within the export utility for the device name. But anyway, let me scroll down to the P's here. I'll select port, and then the list of attributes is listed on the left side. I just select from this list and just add them to the data set. So I've picked administrative status, the description of the port, inbound and outbound speeds, and the operational status. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add the device name to that. The nice thing about this utility is there's a preview button. So it will list the tables here, and then I can generate, go into the database and generate up to 100 rows of information. So I've done that. I can see here that it is returning information about the ports. So this is good. I'll go close my window. You can change the target table name. For the most part, most of our customers utilize the target names that are already selected here. So I'll save that. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to add the port traffic metrics. So this is a time series. Again, first thing I need to do is select the component. In this case, it's going to be port. And then I have to select one or more time series. So if I wanted to export both the traffic rate and the utilization, I'd have to create two different data sets. For the purpose of our demo, I'm just going to be exporting the traffic rate information. And again, I select these. I'm going to select all of them. Excuse me, I'll do a quick preview here. And you can see it is returning data. I have different object IDs here that indicate different ports. And I can see traffic here. So this looks good. I'll save this. So step one is done, which is creating the data sets. And then step two will be to create a job and assign it to one or more data sets. Again, you can see I have an existing job here for exporting to an Atrium CMDB. The tilde character indicates that it was created by a configuration file and it can't be modified. So I'll just create a new job. And call it port traffic export. I'll assign a description to the job, which is going to be the same as the name. I'm going to enable it. Then there are 4 pull downs here. So I select the view that I want. In this case, I'm going to export from all views, and I select the schedule. And as JD mentioned before, my minimum granularity is hourly for any data export. I'm using this for capacity planning purposes. I have a small number of ports in my network, so I'm going to do this daily. We have another large customer of ours that exports 40,000 ports worth of data. They do it hourly. And again, this is not meant to be retained for a long period of time. So the maximum age out time is 6 months. If you need to have long-term storage, the recommendation is to export to the export database and then copy that information to another database that's capable of performing on large data sets. The other thing you need to set is the backfill. So this serves 2 purposes. Number one, if we were to have a database that's on an external server and we lose the connection to it, it will backfill up to a maximum of whatever the backfill value is, in this case, 2 days worth of data. The other thing it does is when you do the initial export, it will backfill whatever this is set to. So it'll do 2 days. Next thing you do is set the target database. I set that to localhost, and the DB name is going to be reports data. This is the name of the export database that you created, and then you need to provide a username and password. And I always recommend that you test the connection. The message you should get back is this: database connection okay, which means it was able to connect to the database. And then I select one or more data sets to be added to the job. I save that, and this is scheduled to run daily. So rather than wait for it to run, I'm going to run it right now. So I click the button here. It submits the job into the queue, and then I can come into the history hyperlink, and you'll see here right now the export job has started, and it's going to take probably around a minute for that job to complete because it is running all the backfill. We'll just wait till it completes here. It should almost be done. Yep, there we go. So it's completed. Subsequent runs of this utility, as long as there's an active connection to the database and hasn't been lost, there's no backfill. So it'll run a lot faster than it just did. And then it's best to just check to make sure that you have data in the database. So I'm going to basically open up the MySQL tool, and that's going to be in your Entuity installation directory in database/bin. I'm on a Windows machine, so to initiate the client, it would be MySQL minus the username and password if I had one, but I don't. There's no password assigned to my database. If you're in a Linux environment, you also have to provide the host name, which is the loopback interface in our case because it's local, and also the port designator. And for MySQL and MariaDB, it's 3306. Once you connect, you'll get a prompt from the client, and you'll see in the square brackets in parentheses, it says none. That means we're not using a database. So the first thing I need to tell the client is what database I want to use. In this case, it's going to be reports data. Everything gets terminated with a semicolon. Now I've changed to that database. All I'm going to do is show the tables. And you can see here that there's a job and a log table, but the two export data sets are right below that. If you want to see how the data is formatted and stored in the database, you can show the table information, or I should say describe the table. So if we looked at the port EX table, this will give us a description, and under the type column will tell you how that information is stored in the database. And the last thing you want to do is just do a select. So I'm going to select from the port EX table just to make sure that there is data in there. And I'm going to limit that as well to 10 rows. And you can see here that it was returned. So everything looks good. I can see different ports in here. They're all off the same device, but if I were to extend that limit statement beyond 10, you would see other devices in here. So everything looks good. Now you would proceed to start testing with whatever external tool you wanted to utilize to extract the data from the database. And I think that's it. JD, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Larry. And Pat, could you check the chat panel and let me know if we've got any questions?
Yes, JD, we have a few. The first one is, I have a dashboard that needs a live data feed from ENA. How do you recommend we implement this?
Right, okay. Whenever I hear people talking about a dashboard, it conjures up in my mind a vision of something that is dynamic and telling me about what's happening right at the moment. Not every dashboard does that, but that's a typical use. And certainly the talk of a live data feed in that question would immediately make me think that data would be expected to be more than an hour, or be less than an hour old, shall we say. So recently gathered data might want to be represented. On that basis, it basically rules out the use of data export, because that data can be up to an hour old. So definitely you want to be looking at the RESTful API, and populating third-party dashboards is a prime use case for the RESTful API.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then we have another one regarding RESTful API. The data access template requires StormWorks data, which is of local significance to an ENA instance. If you have a consolidation server, are you able to pass the Polar server ID, or are you required to connect to the individual Polar API interface?
Okay, that covers the whole multi-server dimension of how the RESTful API works in server environment. For almost all RESTful API functions, including the manipulation of the data access templates, listing them out and setting new values to them and that sort of thing, all of that can be done completely through the consolidation server. And if you are applying those operations to one of the remote polars, you would simply include the server ID of that remote polar, and so the operation would be performed on the remote polar, but you pass the command into the consolidation server. So you would only be talking to the consolidation server, but you can actually have things done to remote servers. The one exception is using data access. When you actually use a data access template, not setting it up, but actually using it to describe data that you want to pull back, that command has to be sent directly to the remote server on which the data is held. So the first thing you would do typically is ask the consolidation server for a list of all of the remote servers with all of their server IDs, and then you would be able to send the commands directly through to those remote servers and have that performed.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question regarding data export. And they say, we have a dozen ENA servers. Can we export from all ENA servers to a single MySQL Maria database instance? What keeps the data from each server separate?
Okay, the answer is yes, you can export from multiple servers, not only into the same database, but into the same database tables. The data is kept apart in such a way that there is no confusion about the fact that it's being written in from multiple servers. Each export operation or export job is uniquely identified, including identified which server is actually executing the job. And within the export database, you will see a table describing all of those export jobs and the servers on which they were performed. And there's an audit log in that database as well, so you can see when the jobs were executed. And every data sample that is written, data entry that's written out to the export database includes the reference as to which job it was that wrote it. So using that technique, you can then trace it back to which server it came from. So yes, they do keep the data apart. The only thing I would say is that if you do have a lot of servers writing into the same database instance, then pay attention particularly to the maximum number of open connections that you are allowed on that database server. That's a configurable item. There's a command line command that you can ask for all of the configuration settings for the database, and it will tell you what the maximum number of open connections allowed is, and it will also tell you how many currently are open. If you had a very large number of servers writing to the same database, it's always conceivable that you might exceed that maximum connection setting. So just pay attention to that.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then can you specify a specific time, for example, 3 o'clock p.m., as a scheduled time instead of hourly, daily, etc., inside a data job?
The standard schedule settings that are available don't include the ability to, for example, run a daily export job at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. However, the scheduler that it uses has the ability to have extra schedules inserted into it, and we will look into what it would take to add custom entries in there. Not quite sure how easy that is, but if you'd like to follow up with us on that, we will get you an answer.
All right, thank you. And then a RESTful data export question. Is the timestamp being used? Is it a Unix time format? Do you need to apply a gap if the server is located in another time zone?
Okay, all of the timestamps that we use in exported data are in Unix format, so they are the number of seconds since the Unix epoch, and that is effectively in UTC, Universal Time format, because it's the number of seconds since the 1st of January 1970 UTC. So everything is in that format, which means that you don't need to concern yourself what local time zone each server is running in. You could have multiple servers running in different time zones. All of the export data is in that common format, so that there is no need to worry about the time zone that it originated in.
And it looks like the last question is, can we increase the backfill option over the limit of 2 months in order to have more data?
The answer is there is a technique for applying non-standard settings that aren't on the menu when setting up jobs from a configuration file. However, I would be very cautious about going beyond that 2-month value for backfill. Even 2 months is quite big. Bear in mind, the very first time that you export, because there was no preceding sample, it will try and export the entire backfill. So if that was set to 2 months, it's going to try and take 2 months worth of data according to your data set and do the export. That could take quite a long time. Additionally, if you were to have a break in connection to the external database, then the next time the connection is successful, it will try and backfill the missing data that it couldn't export while the connection was broken. That's the whole point of backfill. And that will take longer than an ordinary export cycle. So if you had a quite significant gap, you're going to have quite a lengthy export operation. That may cause issues depending upon the nature of your systems. So just be aware of it. But the answer technically is yes, but be cautious.
Okay, thanks, JD, and that's it on the questions.
Okay, well, Thank you very much, Pat. If you can step me on the slides, got some helpful resources for you here. Keep in mind, there are a variety of helpful resources for you to quickly find information on ENA. The totally updated ENA Help Center, we've only just updated it, is searchable and has a large number of videos, tutorial videos, that can help you in your understanding of ENA, and a whole range of reference material and other tutorial topics that are well worth looking through. It's a goldmine of information up there. You can get to that either from the Entuity corporate website through support, or from the help option in the main menu on ENA. Now, I want you to keep in mind that all of our tech talks are recorded, and they're available on the Entuity YouTube Center. So go along to Entuity, take a look, go along to the YouTube Center, take a look there. We've got a large number going back in history that will explain a multitude of different topics. The next tech talk is scheduled for September, after the summer break. So we'll see you in a couple of months. If you have any further questions about today's content, be sure to contact your Entuity system engineer. We're here to help you get more out of ENA. And lastly, should you have any suggestions for topics for a future tech talk, let us know. Send us your ideas at tech.talks@entuity.com. We really would like to know what you want to hear about. So that leaves me to thank you all for attending today's Entuity Tech Talk, and have a great rest of the week.